Okay, and welcome to another episode of the Athletic Development Show, proudly brought to you by Iron Edge. A very special guest, Harley Gray. Super excited to have Harley on the show. Harley is an old friend of mine who I've known since he was just a kid. He's the son of my mentor, Bruce Gray.
You say you've referred to me as you've known me since I was just a kid. And I don't know, sorry for interrupting you, but
no, it's good. Let's do this.
Maybe because of like the lack of hair up here, you can refer to me as that, but I'm not sure if you're that much older than I am.
Well, I don't feel much older than you now, but it seemed like a long time when I started at Bodywork, because I started there as a customer in '96. And then coaching in '99. How old were you in '99?
'96, I was 14. So '99, I was 7.
Yeah. Close enough. And Hal, thanks for coming on the show. I think there's heaps of to chat about that's really interesting. I want to jump straight into, though, I want to understand the mind of an esports champion, because one of your quiet little past things is that you were, I believe, the only Australian to have won. What's your claim to fame with the
I wasn't aware of this until a gaming colleague of mine pointed it out. He's a bit of a Quake historian. I'll just shout out to Marcus Cook. It was in 2001. I won the CPL one-on-one Quake World tournament. And to date, I'm the only Australian. I'm pretty sure this is true. I'm the only Australian who has won an international level one-on-one AFPS, which stands for Action FPS tournament. Mm-hmm. So
that's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. I peaked too early, though, unfortunately. I don't think I can really keep up these days. So
that's what I wanted to ask. Like, if you were young now, would that have been a thing you'd have gone down as like a pro esports? But do you think that's something
I don't know.
You've done?
Ask my kid in like 4 years.
Is he really good?
Actually, he's really getting into the Fortnite, much to my dismay. But like I watch him play, and I can see if people are good or if they suck. And I'm watching him, and I'm like, Jesus.
Really?
It's actually crazy watching him. It's a different sort of skill set to what there is in Quake, but like I can definitely appreciate what he's doing. And it's like he's 10. Okay.
Yeah. Crazy. I'd love to talk to you about what you had to do to become that good at a video game. And that was at a time where it wasn't as dominant a part of the culture as it is now. But yeah, I'm interested in just on like how much practice do you, and what's the mentality you bring to it? Tell us the story of all that.
I suppose it's not exactly an athletic endeavor, but it's, I was practicing for upwards of 8 hours a day for, a good 6 months. And, at the time I would not have, it wasn't even in the pursuit of a world title or anything like that. It was, that tournament that came along, I wasn't expecting that at all. Every now and then we'd have, local competitions. There'd be like a state competition. It wasn't even as formal as that, but when this American thing came up with a bit of prize money attached, we the community in Australia decided to run a few competitions to find the best player. The thing is, I knew that I was not the best player, but our best player was busy doing real life stuff, so I ended up winning the Victorian, and then I went on to in New South Wales, they ran a bigger one, so I got the money from that, and they were like, we'll give you a little bit, but if you decide to go to compete in America, we'll give you all of it. So of course I wanted to go.
Right.
The only condition of my dad paying my way was I had to do family slave labor when I returned, which is basically why I'm in my career right now. Yeah.
How interesting. So you had to work in the gym when you returned?
Pretty much. If you remember, we did a big reno where we cleared out the change rooms from the middle of the gym and, moved everything.
That was the best reno. I worked at Bodyworld from 1999 till 2015, and up until the reno, when you wanted to take someone from the cardio room to the weight room, you had to walk through the toilets.
Yeah, So if you've got a client of the opposite gender, then you'd be like, "I'll see you on the other side." Yeah, cool.
I'll see you on the other side.
You go the other way. Yeah,
it was crazy. Yeah, so you helped. That was part of your working off support from Bruce.
The most memorable part of that was when Tony Hanley, the builder mate of Dad's, he's like, "Harley, just grab that toilet and come chuck it off the end of the balcony." So I had to carry this, ceramic toilet bowl, and there was like water sloshing over me, and the smell didn't go away for a while. And that's really what I remember from that.
Which I should say, Bruce tried to keep those toilets too. He had to be.
He's not one to waste
very sternly. Not anything. What was it that made you good, and did you know it at the time? It's because clearly there are other people putting in the hours. It's not just about the hours. Like, what is it in the skill set that makes you good at a game like Quake? And how does Quake actually work for those that, like me, that have kind of forgotten how? It's a first-person shooter.
Yeah, first-person shooter. You don't get a loadout, so you spawn. You've got a terrible weapon that does absolutely nothing, and you've got to avoid getting killed by people with more powerful weapons. Go and pick up some powerful weapons. You play.
So spawning is when you're sort of born and you start. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if you're in a one-on-one game, you both type in ready, and then you have to type. There wasn't a button. And then the clock will count down, and then you both start, and you both appear in different locations of the map. The maps are set, so you already know like the whereabouts of everything, and the because it had been around for a long time. A few maps were established where everyone knew them beyond inside out. And so you'd have to sort of, you'd hear a sound and you'd be like, okay, the other guy's over there, so that means, these are my options. And so it's all about just collecting weapons and getting armor and out positioning.
So you're navigating through what looks kind of like just a maze of walls, but you have a really intricate knowledge of where the overall floor plan of how it actually looks.
You know exactly where you are. You like if the enemy player picks up any item, it makes a sound, and based on where you are and based on what you hear, you know exactly where they are on the map. And so, to a degree, like you don't need to be looking at things; you just know where things are.
And so part of your superiority was that your ability to that part of your brain that remembers where everything, like that spatial memory, is that a big part of the game, or is it reflexes? What are the determinants?
By that stage, everyone it was assumed that everyone had that knowledge of like where everything is and what all the different sounds mean. So it was really about execution. So like aim was a huge factor, reflex was a huge factor, predicting when the other guy was going to do certain things is a huge factor. I can't believe we're talking about Quake on an athletic podcast. But I can talk about it all day. I don't know if you're like, listenership is that interested, but I'm happy to go
I
for
reckon
it.
They're on the edge of their seats. And so one of the interesting things is, when you're training for sports, you have to respect physiological supercompensation cycles. So, you attack the body hard on a Monday. In many ways, at the earliest, Wednesday, the body's respond. It's, peak collagen supercompensation 72 hours. So it takes a while for the body to come back up. Less so for swimming because there's not ground reaction forces. So swimmers can train twice a day because they're not having to deal with the impact of the earth. But with gaming, you're just relying on kind of neural supercompensation, which is obviously going to be quite different, isn't it?
It's really interesting, and I've made that. I've sort of thought about that, subsequently because my wife was involved in like competitive powerlifting, and
she's awesome at it.
She's great. very few times, but she did say to me, like, man, how did you stay up there? Like, what? And I'm like, man, I'll just play all the time. Like, there's no, I felt like, I didn't feel like I was in training for anything. I just liked playing, and I just wanted to be the best. And I just kept, I mean, imagine if you're an athlete and you just love your game beyond anything else, and there's no recovery time for your body. Really, like, as you say, like, neurologically is the main thing. So I would wonder now, like, you know, if you don't have to worry about the actual tissue adaptation, like muscle and joint wise, if the nervous system is the only thing that needs to adapt, how much time can you train that? How often can you train that? How much recovery does it need? I don't know, but it's definitely, you definitely seem to be able to go harder for longer than a physical sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. It's fascinating. And afterwards, I'm curious about I'm very curious about neuroplasticity. It's just such an interesting area, the way, you know, our brain can respond to, you know, like, so taxi drivers in London who have what they call the knowledge, which is the ability to memorize the entire city, they have like a really massively well-developed part of their, I think it's the hippocampus and some other part.
Yeah, they're like memory and spatial thing. Yeah. I've read that one.
Yeah, and so yours would be like really juiced up, I imagine, after that.
Totally specific, man. I reckon it's completely specific. Like, if you put me into another game, it will still take me a while to start to really memorize where everything is and to make all those connections with what sounds mean what. And,
yeah, but wouldn't what I'm curious about is I wonder whether you would have just better capacity to do those things. So, for instance, what are you like with directions in the real world? Like, are you good at remembering where things are? Like, has there been other? Because you've been very successful in what you've done. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if we're driving somewhere, I've got my wife in the car, and you know, we deviate from which way the map says to go. She's like, "Oh, we go in the Harley way." I'm like. And that doesn't necessarily mean an optimized way. That tends to mean we're just going to guess, and then eventually 10 minutes when we're in the wrong direction, I will
you'll concede.
I'll concede.
So there's a bit of a thread in your life that, at least from my vantage point, which is that when you do stuff, you go in all out. Like, you become a wonderful practitioner as a myotherapist. Like, you're highly, you're brilliant at that. Like, you're really skillful at that. You went in for your DJ phase, where you went all out and you were 100% committed as a DJ. Where does that come from? Is that just you just don't like to do stuff and be half-assed? Because I can't recall seeing you do anything half-assed.
I don't know. I like what I like, and I'm not interested in what I'm not interested in, and so pretty much that. Yeah. I just tend to latch on to things, and it's funny you say that. Like, even within those things, like in gaming now, I don't play any games seriously, but you know, if you put 50 games in the library, you know, it'll tend to be pretty much one. I'll like very quickly converge on one, and I'll try but where does that come from? No idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your dad's world class. Like, he's also a very focused individual who's absolutely world class at what he does as well. And Bruce is amazing. Like, so there is a thread of, if you're going to do something, do it properly. I'd like to talk about being a myo, because you're our first myotherapist guest on the show.
Yeah.
What made you want to become one? Where do you think it's an interesting space, I think, for myos. I want to talk about that in a minute. But firstly, what made you want to become one?
My wife made me do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, initially it was you know, a case of, oh, honey, can you massage this, or honey, can you massage that, and why don't you do a massage course? And that's literally how that happened. And you know, I think it's just because it's, you know, I've spent so much time in the gym. I love the gym. I've done other jobs, and those other jobs have made me appreciate, actually, I didn't just fall into it. I actually really do like this. Maybe I'll stick with this. And, bodywork has an obvious connection with training. And, you may as well, like I did my first massage course, and I don't think I did another course for another 3 or 4 years, and it was really stagnating. And so I found just doing more courses, learning more stuff, this is interesting again. So yeah. Yeah. So with Myo, there's a few different pathways. Like you can go straight into uni and just do it off the bat. It's a 2 to 3 year course depending on the time. Or I did it as I did my Cert 4 massage diploma of remedial and then advanced diploma Myo. Yeah.
Yep. Which I think is a good way to go, because what you're learning becomes more sticky. Like because you're out there practicing in the real world. It's not just sort of you finish a course and at the end of it, like you're definitely getting into it from get go. What do you think makes a good myo? My experience has been that myos are brilliant because they have a narrower focus, so they sort of know what to go after. What are your thoughts on what actually makes for a really good myo?
I think any therapist who actually gives a shit about getting their clients good results becomes good. And I think the things that people are good at will defer. And I'm sure you've had the experience of you've gone to 5 different physios will give you 5 different things, and same with pretty much any sort of practitioner. Everyone's got their own way of doing it. Myo is obviously a bit more hands-on based, but even within myos, you get some who will be more exercise based because that's the way that the evidence is tending to go at the moment. There's not a lot of good evidence for the hands-on stuff, but yeah. It's so interesting, the lack of evidence for the hands-on stuff, because anecdotally, like, you get a really good treatment and you run faster, lift heavier and feel better, stuff stops hurting, and it's like, this is not placebo. There's clearly legitimate physiological benefit being elicited from this intervention. Like, there's no two ways about it. Why do you think it's still an area that struggles to have that scientific support? Like, what is it that we're not able to measure, do you think, we know it's working? As you're asking that question, I'm like, is it an issue of not knowing what to actually measure? Because if you use an ultrasound, you can look at the tissue, you can look at the tissue density, you can look at is there a tear. Obviously, body work can't fix a tear. It's body work may or may not help with swelling. It may or may not help with inflammation. But I think what we can say for sure is that body work can help reduce pain. There's probably some physiological stuff. There's probably some psychological stuff going on, but whatever it is, it's not a placebo.
No, it's not placebo. I mean, there may be some placebo coming along as well that helps. Like, if a really, the theatre of a really good session probably tops up the actual benefit as well with some placebo as kind of icing on the cake. But there's definitely cake there. I'll never forget, I was seeing a friend of mine, Jack Dix, is a physio, and I was having problems with my left glute med, and it was affecting my single leg squat, and I had this valgus moment that I didn't like. And he just dropped the elbow in and went to town on my glute med, like just absolutely caned it to where I was nearly crying. And then he said, all right, pop up, let's try that single leg squat again. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm not going to be able to do it. You've just killed me. There's no way I can do anything. Got up off the table and dropped into the best left leg single leg squat I'd done for months. And I was just like, wow, there's something going on here. And his position was that, that the pain and tightness had caused inhibition, and therefore the muscle just wasn't going to operate very well. And that makes perfect sense to me. But yeah, it's crazy people are still arguing against it. You touched on the point a moment ago. The evidence there's more robust evidence around exercise interventions than there is around bodywork. That has caused a lot of physios to really go the direction of not being so hands-on, which I reckon is a gift for myos. I'm really curious to because you end up with physios who are not that good, not actually always that good at prescribing exercise because they didn't get that much training in it. They've kind of lent away from one of their strengths. Yeah, what do you think of that? Where are we going to be in 5 years' time? Do you think that creates a bigger avenue for myo to kind of grow into because you guys are still prepared to put the hard thumbs and elbows work in?
Yeah, look, I think whatever you do, in the therapeutic space, it's good to have knowledge of a bunch of different things, but you kind of need to be good at something, like really good at something. And like, what are we doing? Where people come to us because they want their glute med to work properly so they can do a squat without, the valgus. And okay, so, maybe there's an exercise that we can do to get the glute med firing a bit better. Maybe there's, a hands-on intervention that we can do. We can stick an elbow in there and, maybe that will reduce the inhibition of that muscle and, why not both? But yeah, for sure, like the space that's being created for hands-on, I honestly have no idea how much, hands-on or like any kind of body stuff that physios do within their course, but it surely can't be as comprehensive as what you go through in like the massage to myotherapy stream.
You guys get particularly good at needling too. Like your needling game is always really strong. And needling is such an important tool. I want to shift gears for a little and ask you about the influence of your training on your treating, because I think that's where you're that real double threat. Tell us about your training history, because you started lifting relatively young, and I'm curious to see how that has informed your work as a myo.
So I don't imagine you guys are that familiar with my dad, but I was basically a Bruce Gray disciple for a long time, and his style of training is just pretty old school, like full body sort of thing. Split programs, multiple movements per muscle group, and deadlifts, squats, heavy stuff, pretty standard sort of things. To be honest, there wasn't much I didn't veer from that sort of thing for a long time. There's two changes that I would say that are actually significant beyond that. Was my Jess wanted to actually do a bodybuilding show. She was thinking about it, and I was thinking, let's get her a coach, someone that's not actually in our circle, so that we can get some different ideas. And then also, if it doesn't work out, then you don't wreck those. You don't have any of those.
It's not awkward.
Friendships and that sort of thing. Yeah. So anyway, there was this dude that I followed, and I rated his stuff, and then I chatted to him about it. She changed her mind, and I said, you know what, stuff it. I've never had another coach. I've never really had another strong input into my own training. So let's give this guy a go, see how he is. And that's basically what's resulted in, when I started with him, I was deadlifting sort of 160. And the other day, last week or two ago, I pulled 220. And it's taken 2 years, but it's like a 220 deadlift. For me, I'm not a genetically gifted person. It doesn't just appear. So there was a lot of, I had to try. Yeah.
So 220 is amazing. Who's the coach?
His name's Chris Sang. His Instagram handle is Real Results Coaching. And
I've seen him. Yeah,
he was based out of Quake.
Is he the one that tore something nasty? Is he the one that tore his patella or something on a squat?
He's the guy who, double patella rupture last year. Double. Yeah, I think he was doing like a 310 squat or something like that. And, it's one of those freak things, because it's not like it was a massive leap for him to do that. Like, he'd been, he'd squatted within 5 kilos of that previously. And yeah, they just went.
It's ruptured.
So, yeah.
It's so interesting.
His back's
we saw...
Yeah,
good. We saw JD, our friend and Bodyworld family member, him rupture his just one. Everything was fine until it wasn't. It's really interesting when you get to those really heavy loads. How sometimes, what do you think is? I mean, we are clearly deactivating the built-in Golgi tendon organ safety mechanisms that switch off power. Like normal humans, the body switches off power to the muscles before it can rip tendons off bones. That's a built-in mechanism. Is it as simple as that? As if we've taken out the mechanism and that's how stuff can snap like that? Or do you think there's other things?
I have no idea.
So interesting.
You know how you get those stories of people who, there was an emergency and they suddenly had strength, and it's like, I think there's got to be a bit of switching off of safety measures to, really
to access that
ability that's, to be able to access that. And I think people who really are like amazing at getting results in their training, maybe they're able to access that a little bit more regularly than some of the rest of us. And maybe sometimes it's not as safe, but there's the ability. I don't know. It's interesting, and we don't really have any way of knowing when that's going to happen either. Like we know that all tissue has a fatigue capacity. We don't know what it is for any given tissue for any given person. But we just need to sort of be, careful in our programming.
I like that. Mark Bell articulated this quite well. He said, you've got that capacity, and every now and then you want to push up against that top level of your capacity, but you don't want to be hitting it all the time. I think, and this doesn't really apply to athletes, because the reality is that for most team sport and individual athletes, we're never actually hitting their capacity of their tendons ever. Like, this is really a lifting sports issue only. And so you said, so that was one influence. So getting is it Chris, did you say?
Yeah.
Getting him to start coaching you, and you took more of a bodybuilding approach for a while. Look,
but when you say bodybuilding, it's like it's a term that you associate it with all different things, but really what it is, it's about the goal that we have in our training is basically to increase muscle mass through the whole body, which is bodybuilding. That, yes, but you say bodybuilding as well. And there's so many other things.
Well, bodybuilding, you think of Speedos, fake tan, oil, and dieting. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And what was the other? You said you had a second influence, change. Yeah.
So knees over toes guy.
Yeah. Good. He's fascinating. It's fascinating. It's an interesting thing. Yeah. Tell me all about that.
Yeah. Okay. So I started his stuff about a year ago.
Ben Patrick is his actual name as well, isn't it?
Yes. And I wanted to see what it was like. I didn't have a dodgy knee. I just wanted to see what it was like because I'd watched some of his stuff like a while back, and I saw him doing some like weird stuff, and I was like, this guy's an idiot. Next. And but then I saw another thing of his where he talked about he talked about the reason that keep your knees behind your toes is kind of like a mantra that's repeated in the gym space, and it has been for decades. It's like, don't put your knees too far forward, you put too much pressure on them, you'll wear them out or whatever. And that's pretty much how I've trained.
I got told off. I remember being told off by people. It's like, oh, you're letting your athletes get their knees past their toes. I'm like, yeah, he's 6'6". He's got a femur as tall as you are. That knee is going to go past the toe bit. It's not going to kill him, and it happens in sport approximately 50 times a game, like in basketball, for instance. Like, it's going to happen. But it was like it was a sacred commandment for a long time, wasn't it?
Well, there's so many of these like gym rules that you shall break. But anyway, Ben Patrick had this video where he was like, that came from, I think he was talking about a study that came from UCLA or something like that. And all the study said was that the greater the angle of knee bend, the greater the pressure on the knee joint. And based off of that, apparently that's where this all came from. It's like, oh,
that's where it came from.
Bend the knee too much. So that's and let's look at human movement and say, hey, there's probably a few situations where your knee does go past your toe. Should that be okay? And it's like, yeah, actually it should. Maybe we can try and figure this out. Maybe we can try and make it safer to go into that region. Maybe we can strengthen through that region. Probably a really good idea. And so I just watched a few more of his things. And I'm like, okay, he's got some weird stuff that the other thing that interested me was that it's not the usual thing you see people doing in the gym, like the stuff that he was showing. I'm like, is this legit, or is this just some weird stuff just trying to get sales? I don't know. Let's give it a go. Gave it a go. Have to say, there's a lot of stuff in there that I don't do it as regularly now. I probably went pretty hard on it for about 6 months, and now I tend to bring it in as like knee maintenance sort of stuff. So happy to talk about that stuff.
So you got to the point where you could do a full sort of sissy squat, didn't you? Like that really intense squat where the knees really lead out,
yes. I think the best I got on that was almost so hard to describe without actually doing it, but on flat ground, unassisted, knees down to the floor, and like pretty much you go on like pretty much horizontal, almost to the level of the ground. I got to about that level. But there's lots of exercises that you can progress, and
it's interesting too. Like the problem is that what I see is that people for a long time was the commandment: you cannot bend the knees too much. And now it's the commandment: everyone has to bend the knees maximally. And it's like, it's because there'll be cases where it's totally just not appropriate to go after that. But I think what's interesting is I listened to a podcast with Ben, and he was talking about how on Instagram, to get attention, he has to occupy these extreme positions. But the actual program is very scaled. It's very incremental. It's like, let's find the minimal effective dose of load at which we can achieve a small increase in range of motion. Let's repeat that times 52 weeks. Like, it's very sensible and incremental. It's just the extreme bits are the bits you show off at the very end of it.
And like the initial program that he starts everyone is called Zero, and zero equipment and zero pain, and those you say zero pain, and then you go and see his video on Instagram where he like jumps off a thing, and then he's like jumps into like a knee over toes squat. He's like back's on the ground, and then he's doing all this crazy stuff, and it's like zero pain. But you get to that, okay, all right,
let's give it a go.
But
did it help you?
He's been really smart.
I think he has. Did it help you at basketball? Because you've played basketball for a long time.
Look, I haven't played enough since I started doing his stuff to say, did it help my basketball? Okay. But what I would say for sure is it would help like the recovery side of things, and I think I would be more resilient in playing basketball. So I had a hiatus from basketball after high school, and then I came back to it maybe a bit before my kid was born, so about 11, 12 years ago. And within a few months, I had a knee that had previously had a bad bursitis episode, and within a couple of months of getting back into basketball, that bursitis had come right back. And I was constantly just playing the maintenance game, trying to keep that under control. And eventually I stopped playing for about a year, got it out under control, and all seemed well. I'd play the occasional game, do the occasional practice session, didn't have a relapse or anything like that of the pain, all good. But then when I started the Neuroplasticity program, there were clear differences between the left and right knee. So it was now they're pretty much as good as each other, and so it's definitely helped with my knee health for sure.
Yeah, cool. And the last sort of topic I want to dive into, one of the reasons I was really excited to have you on this show is there is a division in the world of strength and conditioning where it's on one extreme end of the camp, you've got Adam Meekins and the guys who are like, there's no such thing as a bad exercise. Everything is great for you provided you dose it correctly. There's no such thing as good form. Who gives a shit? Just lift it and you'll be fine. And at the other end, there's physios and Pilates instructors who are like, you have to do it absolutely perfectly. And clearly to me, they're both wrong.
Yeah.
But the problem is you can't have an interesting discussion with someone from the other camp because it's like identity politics. It's so polarized.
Yes.
And I wanted to chat to you because we can actually we can respectfully disagree and have a good chat about it.
I would love to disagree. Let's disagree. What can we disagree on?
Well, I'm really curious. And I watch with great curiosity your very heavy lifting with a reasonably bent back at certain times, which is different to how we train our athletes here. But that's not to say that it's invalid. The extreme position is every tissue can just adapt, and if you just apply enough stress to it cumulatively, you'll be fine. Where do you sit on the back and spinal load and spinal flexion? Like, do you like Jefferson curls, for instance? I'm curious to see what your thoughts are and what you think its tolerance and adaptability is.
Look, you can't take any extreme position. That's just silly. Did you watch the podcast? This was about a month ago, I think, between Andrew Locke and the guy who Meekins is sort of associated with a bit. I think Greg Lehman. Greg Lehman.
No, I didn't.
You should watch that podcast purely for, for the entertainment value. Because Andrew basically like wrote an essay of his positioning, and he didn't come to have a discussion. He came prepared for war. Anyway, my position is basically,
and so in that, just to follow through on that. So in that position, Andrew's the one saying you shouldn't bend the back too much, and Greg's saying bend the hell out of it.
Andrew is not saying that you can't bend the back. Andrew's position is that flexion movements under load are what you want to avoid. But a moment arm with some degree of flexion is not a problem as long as there is not flexion movement while that load is being moved.
I think that's such a good distinction. So the idea being that if you start the lift with a bit of a bent back and you keep it bent the whole way through, that's if you had to pick your poison and you've got either a bent back or a back that bends mid-lift and suddenly has a loss of stability, that sudden wrenching change of position, that's problematic is his point of view. That makes all the sense in the world to me.
And the thing is that those two did agree on some points, but the thing that you can't argue with is physics. And I don't have an amazing grasp of physics as some people do, but I've got a few concepts that if I'm coaching someone and if I watch them and if if their spine isn't perfectly straight, if they're not perfectly neutral, it's not an issue for me, depending on it depends on what's the goal of the person who's training. Like if you've got someone whose goal is to get stronger to support their sport, then why would you flog them in the gym to the point where that puts them in risk of an injury? There's absolutely no point.
Because they're making their living with that spine.
Yes. Yeah, but if someone's living is powerlifting, and let's face it, not many people can make a living.
But if that's their thing,
but if that's their thing that they're going for, then there's going to be some times where you do sort of need to put yourself in that is it safe for me to do this? I don't know, but this is what I need to do in order to progress. So let's go.
Because the physics of it are that you really you can't, unless you're incredibly gifted in terms of like really short legs, amazing mobility, you really can't maintain a nice position. Like in order to lift the heaviest possible weight, you want the bar pretty close to your body, and you're going to get a bit of flexion there. Even if you're sumoing, like a sumo wide stance, there's still going to be an element of that. And so when in your own training, so we obviously see the more extreme end of it on your Instagram, which is you chasing some really big weights. But it was interesting when we caught up yesterday briefly, it was part of why I wanted to get you on the show, was you were talking about how, I'm not training like that all the time. Can you speak to that? I think that's really interesting for people to see the behind the scenes that goes on with what I would call some pretty hardcore lifting from you.
Yeah. So like to be honest, when I'm actually training, it all feels pretty hardcore. But you've got different flavors of hardcore. So you've got a typical, training cycle where at the start of the cycle, you start with like a lighter weight for more reps. And then, gradually, each week you might reduce the reps, increase the weight, build up to, trying to, a peak single and then drop it back again. That cycle might look like it's 4, 8, 12-week cycle, whatever. But I think you can't expose yourself to like maximal loads all the time. I think that's dumb. But you don't want to sit on high rep stuff all the time either, because you want to give yourself a variety of loads to expose yourself to. And yeah, it's interesting, but as well, you always need to look at things in context of what are you trying to actually achieve. Is the number one goal to increase muscle size? Well, then you might train this way. Is the number one goal for knee and joint health? Well, then you might train another way. It's really, you got to tailor what you're doing to what your goals are.
And do you think you'll ever compete? Are you interested in the competition side of it, or is it you just like lifting really heavy things?
I did go in a powerlifting comp one time, not to be competitive, but purely because I was helping Coach Jess a bit, and I just wanted that athlete perspective of being in a comp, and that was actually. Nice. There's a point of the comp where I think it was, in a 3-lift powerlifting comp, it tends to go squat, bench, and then deadlift at the end. And I think we'd done the squat and the bench sessions, and it was going to be like an hour and a half until my deadlift. And I was like, oh man, I'm like starving. I got to go for food. And it was at the weightlifting club in Hawthorne, I think. And I'm like, oh, it's going to go down to like Glenferrie Road or wherever it was and get a sandwich or something. And Jess is like, are you sure? Is that a good idea? Like, do you want me to go for you? No, it's okay. I'll go. Man, I was off my head. I'm in the middle of the comp. Like everything's like, I was high. I think I got back with like 15 minutes to warm up, and Jess is like, I was trying to call you. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot my phone. Like what? So it was really good to get that. Like you kind of don't know what's going on. I think someone who's a bit more of a seasoned competitor would be a little bit more composed than what I was. But it's good to get that extreme example.
How interesting. And just a few more sort of powerlifting questions. So some things have become more like, so sumo deadlifts have become more and more a staple. It seems to me that it feels like, at least what I'm seeing, it feels like, whereas sumo used to be maybe, what do you reckon?
You'd hardly see
10 years ago? 10 years ago, it was like 20%. Now I feel like it's 80%. Is that how you feel?
World, like hardly anyone did sumo. It felt like, because of, I can't speak to the rest of the industry because of the bubble that I'm still in, basically. But it seems to me that until Andrew Locke started prescribing sumo for all these people that had lower back issues, we hardly saw any sumo in the gym. But yeah,
sumo makes a lot more sense. I mean, because the goal is not to make your body stronger, really empowered. The goal is to move the bar the prescribed distance. And so if you can find a better leverage way to do it. Yeah. So that's come into favour, and what it seems to me also is certain things have gone out of favour. Like, so deficit deadlifts used to be a real thing. People are like, well, you just need to chase if you're not strong in flexion, let's dial up the flexion and make it deeper.
Makes sense.
Deeper range. Can't argue with that. It seems to me also that they have fallen by the wayside, which I don't think is a bad thing. Are you seeing that same trend as well, where it's less emphasis on that deep range?
It's definitely like the accessory type things. I'm seeing them less. Like some people still really use them a lot, just to add variance in their training. But again, it comes down to what's the goals of training. Like if it's your regular person who just wants to get a bit stronger, get a bit better, more conditioned for their sport or whatever. I'm not sure if deficits are an ideal use of your time. It all depends,
Yeah, there's always that opportunity cost of what are you spending your time and energy on that you could be better. Like
you can go full one way. Like I did the Powerlifting Australia coaching cert with with Robert Wilkes a number of years ago, and their attitude was like, why are you spending any time on accessories at all? Like the amount of accessories they did was like this.
Really?
Yeah, it was really, a few specific things that they did for extras, and it was pretty much just the 3 lifts and not a lot else.
It seems to me that some accessory work to build capacity is really smart.
Yeah. Yeah, they
just like doing higher reps is smart.
Accessories, but it was very limited the amount that they spent it on. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Hal, this has been such an interesting thing to chat about. I want to round things out by...
How are we at 45 minutes? This is really...
It's a good combo. I knew it'd be a good combo.
You've done well. No one can get me to talk for that long. So, yeah. It's going to be a bit of a quiet podcast. Yeah.
I knew it was going to be interesting. What I'm curious to kind of close things out with is... what do you think that coaches who've been, there's a lot of coaches. So I was incredibly lucky to just kind of trip over and end up in Body World as a young coach. And I got to learn so much from the people around me. And even things that are a little counterintuitive. Like, for instance, I remember I was 30 years old, and I just got the gig with the Dandenong Rangers that JD had kind of handballed to me. And I was going to get the girls to squat the way I'd been squatting at that point in time, which was wider stance so I could get more depth. Because, take a wide stance, easy to get more depth.
Yep.
And Bruce said to me, he said, why are you going so wide with that? These guys don't run with their feet out that wide. You should be going narrower. And it just hadn't occurred to me that you could change the rules. I was like, what? I can do that? It's like, yeah, just go narrow. It's going to be better for the sport. And at the time, I was really hooked on, no, we had to go really deep. So ironically, Bruce kind of showed me that maybe there was another way. And then I ended up sort of experimenting in my own little way and found actually for a lot of the athletes we train, squatting as low as you can get whilst maintaining neutral spine, which ends up often being around 90-degree knee bend rather than deeper. That actually seems to really work at increasing the vertical, not banging up their back, and everyone's happy. So I was like super lucky to be in this interesting mixture of powerlifters and people that like lifting heavy that really knew you needed to get a good dose of stimulus. Like they were very dose hungry. But also an original thinker like Bruce, who was like, no, well, you can actually also modify things and question things. And to me, that was such a great way to get going, rather than going straight through uni, where you come out of uni and it's like you're so full of knowledge already. You're 21 years old and you know everything already, and you haven't actually experienced much. You haven't seen people tear muscles off the bone, as we get to see it at Body World. You get to see some good, good accidents.
Yeah. We got a stretcher in the back. just because I remember to wipe the blood off it.
I saw some stuff over my time, over my 15 years or so there.
Yeah, there's still some of the culprits.
What advice do you think is good? What do you think a young coach could best hear about the weight room that helps make them better from both your myo point of view and your sort of Body World upbringing point of view? What do you think are the big, 2 or 3 big rocks that people should be thinking of?
If you're involved in any body related stuff, I think that you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't train. You have to understand, what is it like to get sore muscles? You have to understand what does it take to progress my strength. And I'm not just saying that you got to train a bit. Like, I think you should really, if doing some, physical improvement stuff, whether it's being some kind of therapist or whether it's being an SNC coach or whatever, like you have to walk that, you don't have to be an elite athlete or anything, but you should really understand what it takes for you to, because, I'm sure you've seen, had a similar experience. Most people make really good gains in the first sort of 6 to 12 months of starting a strengthening program. After that, the gains don't come as easy, and you really have to, you sort of got to push yourself to a level that you didn't have to the first however long. And so people that are involved in coaching, and even the rehab space, it's the same. I see it as the same thing. It's just a continuum. If you're in rehab, you're at this end. If you're at performance, you're at the other end. It's the same thing. Like we're still working on tissue adaptation and all of that stuff that goes along with it. So you got to practice what you preach. What else? I would say, obviously, you need to surround yourself with people that know what they're doing. Hopefully that know more than what you know, who have better experience than what you have. Like I know that you've said a few times that you personally have done a really good job of surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you, which makes my life superpower. But being able to tell, but like that's. How do you tell if someone is good at what they do? If they've been established in what they're doing for a long time, doesn't necessarily mean that they're great at it. So I would look at, are they getting results for themselves and for their, the people that they work with, which is something you sort of have to pay attention to over a period of time.
Which has become harder these days because sometimes people who are better at self-promoting are more noticeable than people who are getting great results. So it's an interesting time to be able to have to sniff out the difference between those two things.
So you just have to pay attention. And the last thing I would say is, it's kind of the same as the first one, but you got to continually look for ways to improve what you're doing, maybe like in an educational or professional sense. So if you're not, if you're just sitting where you are, then you're undoubtedly going to stagnate and lose motivation, and that's that snowballs into not actually doing well, not getting results. So you really need to work on bettering yourself in as many aspects as you can.
That's a perfect thread. I couldn't agree more. That's great. Hal, thanks again so much for coming on the show. It was great to get to catch up. We will share Harley's information regarding his Instagram account. And do you have a website as well for the Myo?
We do actually. So my wife and I, we've just launched a new website. Cool. We've kind of done a sort of joint business thing called Set Health. It stands for Strength, Education and Treatment. So
nice.
So I do the myo and strengthening stuff, and Jess is actually now a diabetes educator. She did her postgrad a few years ago, and
good on her. That's great.
So she actually runs programs for like early learning centers who for kids with type 1.
Right.
So yeah, that's our website, and
so sethealth.com.au.
Yeah,
cool. And we'll link that in the show notes as well as your Instagram. Harley, thanks heaps for coming on the show, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys next week. All right, cheers. See ya.